Welcome to the RevOps Lab, a podcast exploring the art and science of revenue operations. To find more episodes and resources on scaling your revenue engine, visit getweflow.com/RevOps.
Hey, Philip.
Hey, Nylas.
So what are we talking about with Mallory today?
Yeah, in today's episode, we talk about the concept of a pipeline council to build alignment, trust, and also fast decision-making across sales, marketing, success, product, and of course, also revenue operations. And Mallory shares what she learned these past years to make it a long-lasting success. And what's really cool about this episode is that it's very practical. So after listening to this, you can essentially just go and start your own pipeline council right away. So yeah, enjoy this episode.
Super excited to have you on board. Yeah, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Good to see you guys.
Yeah. So for the audience, who are you? What do you do?
Sure. My name's Mallory. I am an operations leader at Nylas. Started my career actually on the marketing side. So that was a great foundation for me. Marketing analyst right out of school at ExactTarget. And then I ended up going through the whole ExactTarget, Pardot, Salesforce sort of journey. And after that, I led marketing teams for a little while before moving into revenue operations at Terminus. And so Terminus was the first place that I had really seen the unified RevOps model, reported to our CFO. And since then, I've just really enjoyed that. I think it's the best way to organize the team and have kind of a true cross-functional RevOps group. And so I've been at Nylas for about a year now. Started with revenue operations and now doing a little bit of business operations in addition to that.
That sounds like a great school with a lot of learnings throughout. I'm curious, how does RevOps work at Nylas? How are you set up? Yeah.
It's funny that you said school. We used to joke about the ExactTarget MBA because it was just so invaluable, all the different experiences that we had there. Anyway, at Nylas, we have about 4 people that are dedicated to specific revenue operations, business partners with sales and marketing and customer success. And we work a lot with the product team as well. And then we also have 2 gentlemen that help us wrangle Salesforce and all the integrated systems there to keep the lights on for all of our teams.
Is the Salesforce team part of the RevOps team or its own team?
Yeah, we're all together under one roof, and we have about 2 stand-ups a week just to make sure that we understand, what's going on across the board, prioritize across teams together. Most of us do our own reporting and analysis, and so that's part of the team that we want to continue to grow out, is to make better use of things like Looker, hire a dedicated analyst and things like that next year. But for now, we're just slinging around Salesforce dashboards and making it work.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar.
You just mentioned product. That's also part of your team is working with product. Just curious, how does that work? Why do you have that direct line with product? I think that's not so common, actually.
Yeah, you're right. It's not that common. So we do have a product operations person who lives in the product team, but we stay really closely connected with them because we have a PLG motion at Nylas, and you can purchase the tool on the website. So we've got sales-led and product-led, and our team helps with managing those processes, the data flows, all kinds of great lead scoring stuff across normal web engagement, but also product engagement. And so we're just kind of always trying to be in lockstep with them to understand what's about to change in the product and that dashboard experience so that we can optimize that, really the lead flow and making sure that we're getting in touch with people at the right time.
Okay, I love that. I also think that makes total sense. If you have a PLG motion, it's kind of necessary that you have somebody who's really closely aligned with the product team. But I don't think it's so common, even though many try to follow the PLG motion. And I think often it fails exactly at that point. So yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah. When we prepared for this recording and we talked in advance, you talked about the concept of a pipeline council, and that really struck with us. And we kind of wanted to make that one of the themes in this podcast recording. Yeah. could you explain, just from your experience and perspective, what a pipeline council is and what it does?
I will do that. So I want to start with like a really brief story. When I started at ExactTarget as a marketing analyst, I was doing a lot of Salesforce reports all the time, just providing people with data. And I always think back to the first time that I was ever sort of put in front of sales. And, we were pretty darn separate. Like sales and marketing alignment was not a big thing back then. This is in like 2010. And my first time presenting to them was coming with a report and a presentation of how much pipeline marketing had delivered to them in that quarter. And so it was the end of the quarter. We were sitting down. I said, hey, here's what we gave you. And didn't we do great? And thinking back now, that is just unheard of. It's so silly to have that cadence like so spread out and not be talking about pipeline all the time. So, the purpose of a pipeline council is really to make sure that you're not in that position. It's a cross-functional group of people that needs to get together frequently. Might be weekly, it might be every other week, but either way, the entire purpose is to just talk about the pipeline, where it's at, what you're doing to improve it, if there are any potential gaps, if there's any collaboration needed on a very specific deal. And so I've done the Pipeline Council at a few companies now. The first company that I learned this from was Cheetah Digital. A guy named Matt Compton was running our Pipeline Council. And at Cheetah, the marketing ops team was separated from the sales ops team. So it was really important for us to get together more frequently in this Pipeline Council format. And I just adopted that and started doing it really everywhere else that I've been. And it's a super helpful way to keep people on the same page. It doesn't mean you're going to like the data, but at least you're talking about it, you're looking at it and trying to, do some collaboration around that.
Yeah. I think it's always good that, different people come together and actually look at the same data, whether you like it or not, and then have a conversation about it. So that's a good starting point. Super curious. Let's go very granular here. Like, how often is it at Nylas? Who is in the council? And what exactly is the agenda?
Yeah, good question. So today at Nylas, we are every other week. I think that we could meet weekly, but people's schedules are just so insane. So we do an hour every other week. My team provides the majority of the data in the deck. And so we try to get that done as soon as we can before the meeting. Ideally, you want to distribute that data to people before you get there so they have some time to look it over. Doesn't always happen that way, just with a lot of priorities and a lot of busyness. But RevOps will always kind of bring the data and run the meeting. And the idea is that we kick off by looking at the status of the pipeline and the forecast. Where are we? Do we have a gap versus where we need to be? And if we do, what are we doing to address that? We'll also go into some of the demand gen metrics. We'll talk about marketing, where demand is coming from. Are we on track or are we not? And then we start to move into kind of round robin updates from sales and marketing and anybody else that needs to, kind of report out on how things are going. So one really great attendee for this call should be the people that are leading your business development, like SDRs, BDRs, whatever people call it, that group of people that is responsible for putting the opportunities into the pipeline. It's a great time to give feedback. So the main attendees for us are sales, marketing operations, and sales operations. So the two guys on my team, and then myself, and even our CRO is there, and sales leadership. And so it's a pretty well-attended call. We also have product marketing most of the time. So that's helpful to discuss things like messaging or what we're seeing, from conversations, just so that they stay on the same page. Right now, we don't always have our partnerships person in the call, but I think in the coming year, that'll become even more important and he'll be there more often because we're really starting to build up our channel pipeline. So really anyone who's contributing pipeline or watching the pipeline or caring about it is kind of on the attendee list. And it's hard to keep it small, but we do try to keep it as small as we can because you do want it to be a group of people that can be really open with each other. We're not pulling punches, we're just putting everything out there and having very direct and transparent conversations because, it's ideally kind of a leadership group that can do that and handle the ambiguity and, getting down to the business there.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that, back in the days at Exact Target, when you presented, there were a few folks in the room who looked, anxious about maybe the numbers that were presented. So how do you create that culture of openness, of maybe, insights and data-driven decision-making and conversation that are not, a finger pointing and, essentially create a real team spirit? Like, are there any tips and tricks you've learned throughout the different versions of this?
It depends a little bit on if you are already centralized in the way that data gets distributed out to people. So if RevOps already owns the dashboard creation for the go-to-market teams and already owns a couple scorecards, you might already be looking at the same information across different groups. But that's not always the case. And so, in situations where people are used to bringing their own data to a meeting and putting their own spin on it and defending their department, it is quite different because RevOps will bring the numbers. There's only one set of them. If anything looks funny, we'll definitely double check it, look into it, make sure that it's accurate. But for the most part, we don't spend a lot of time debating the data. And so first, that saves time. Second, I think it frees people up to just take themselves out of their day-to-day role and think like a business owner and just look at things a little bit more objectively. It's a partnership, right? And I've seen, I've launched this a couple times now, and the pattern is always the same. It's really funny. So this is kind of like a what to expect. The very first meeting, the energy is really high. You're kind of setting out what you want your agenda to look like. You are making sure that everybody's on the same page about what data needs to be presented and what their role is in the pipeline council. The second meeting, the data comes, the energy is pretty high. Everyone's collaborating. It's like, wow, it's so great for all of us to be together. You start to realize how valuable it is. The third meeting is the chasm, right? The trough of despair in the hype cycle. That is the meeting where you get down to some of the numbers that don't look as good. And you start to talk about some of the issues. And everyone starts to get a little bit more vulnerable. And then by the end of the third call, everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is really bad. And you hit that low point, and then from there you rebound. But funny enough, I think you need to experience that as a group. And you do need this group of leaders to just have the utmost transparency about what's working and what's not. It's a great time to check in on SLAs and keep each other accountable for, is your team doing the right things for me? Am I doing the right things for you? Because if it's the leadership there, then we can really impact the way that those things are working. So it's a fun experience. It's always funny to watch it play out, and you never want it to be the same for 5 quarters in a row. It'll get boring and stale. So you're always changing things up a little, but it's a great time together.
Yeah. You talked about the first couple of meetings. So speaking maybe in marketing lingo, but what's sort of the time to value that we're talking about here? When do you typically see a council have a real impact that people notice that, with leadership comes by and says great job, guys? How does that look?
I would say it takes a quarter. I think it really does. The tough conversations, they happen pretty soon. And then getting to the solutioning and trying to make sure that you're tackling very specific issues, I think it takes a quarter for that to really come to life and see some progress. The other thing that's pretty nice is you have a block on the calendar with all of these people. And if there's ever a very topical need, for us, it was redefining our MQL process and the definition of a qualified lead. We wanted to do some work on that at Nylas. And so we were able to use that pipeline council time to really progress that project. And it was kind of the special topic during our meetings because we just happened to have everybody there. And it was all the right people in the room. So that's another benefit. But like anything else, I think you've got to give it a little bit of time to work out, and people need time to, make sure that they feel comfortable stepping up and talking about their department, how it's going, and what they're doing to change things.
If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to check out the RevOps letter, a newsletter where Yannis and I share insights from the best revenue operators in the world. It's packed with actionable tips, insightful reports, and strategic advice. And if you have questions, just hit reply and we'll answer them personally. That's what over 1,000 operators love about it already. Go to getweflow.com/RevOps letter or just go to the show notes and subscribe now. That makes total sense. I think actually, time to value within a quarter actually sounds pretty good to me. If you think about most tools and processes to implement, right, that's actually, I would say, pretty fast. And curious because you also, set that up multiple times now. I think one important, group sort of like to convince about like the concept of like a pipeline council is definitely like the leadership team. How do you typically do that? Because like, I would think, at least, maybe I'm wrong here, but I would think that it's actually very hard to make that measurable in clear KPIs, right? Like at least like you could also say like, okay, like that improvement, and like in this KPI, that it really has something to do with the council. That I would say is hard to prove because it could just be like, yeah, this is just the work that the marketing team did or customer success team did. It has nothing to do with the council.
Yeah, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Like I don't think that I ever try to drill in and find a very specific ROI from something that the council did. I think you're right in that it may not change your tactics at all. It may not change your strategy at all. But what it does is that it makes everybody aware. It makes everybody bought in. Sales actually knows what marketing's working on. Marketing actually knows who all the most important prospects are in the funnel. And you just have better alignment. So the worst thing that can happen between sales and marketing is when one team thinks everything is going great and the other team thinks everything is going terrible. That is really the worst thing. So I think that Pipeline Council really just prevents that, and it keeps people on the same page so that you don't have one team celebrating and one team, crying in the corner around not hitting quota. Like, we need to be on the same page there. It may not have that much impact on what we decide to do about it, but I think it accelerates the speed with which you get things done, and it keeps people just aligned on where the business is at.
Yeah, I love this so much because I think about a business where you don't have that group of people coming together on a regular basis and the ripple effects of that, right? And I think we've all been there and done it. Sales and marketing conflicts between product and sales or sales and CS, and no forum where the leadership team can align on how to change things or even just address them and say, well, it's not the top priority to act on. But if you don't have it, it's really challenging. And so I think this is fantastic. I'm curious about a few more things here. So you mentioned you start off with data, right, which is presented by RevOps to make it essentially the facts, not an opinion. But then there's round robin on the actual leaders in the specific departments reporting on specific things. What are they typically giving an update on? What would you recommend the topics should be?
Yeah, I think the topics will vary a little bit just based on where big projects are for your company. But generally, once we get through the data, people are going to come and bring their major program updates. So a lot of times marketing has more to present at Pipeline Council than sales does. My goal is to make sure that sales is feeling heard. So anything that's working really well or anything that feels like a blocker, I want them to get that out there. Any support they need for really big opportunities, it's a great chance to collaborate. But then marketing is bringing more of the, here's what's coming, here's what our calendar looks like, here's what we need from you guys to help us support this event, invitations for webinars, and just the stuff that you need them to be aware of and bought in on. And then talking together about industries that are working well and outbound campaigns and where we're seeing progress and traction. Our team loves trading notes on where are your best conversations happening? Are you having success in conversations in this industry or this industry? And then they try to absorb all of that and use it in content and really, take what's working and put it back out there to get that that flywheel kind of going. So I think there are a variety of ways that you could tackle it. When there's a big campaign, it's a great time to check in on progress. So if you've got like a brand new piece of content, your goal is 1,000 downloads, and you come every week and you've got your little thermometer of how many downloads so far. It's just little things like that, sharing progress and making sure everybody knows how to support each other.
Yeah, it sounds to me like information flows a lot faster, and your way of continuous learning is something that is also supercharged in that way, especially with regards to probably messaging and ICP, which is always overlapping across the whole go-to-market motion, and something that's also really hard to measure in my mind. And so bringing up anecdotes and sharing what marketing is seeing and sales is seeing, and potentially also CS, right, is probably really, really useful. So yeah, sounds great.
Just jumping in there, I think also, one of the things that really grinds my gears is when you see these posts on LinkedIn from salespeople complaining about like, oh, MQL is terrible, like marketing never does anything for us. And I think it can't go in any direction, right? And I think the most successful companies, they are built on great culture. And to me, like the way you talk about this, it really means like essentially like the Pipeline Council is a way to, help build a great culture between the different teams and departments, and not just like for like a short amount of time, but to kind of like maintain that and keep it going. And I think that's so important to make that collaboration between marketing and sales a success, and not to the one in that corner and the other one in that corner. And I mean, obviously that's the purpose of revenue operations also, right? But I still think it's not enough that just one person tries to connect them. Like having everybody sit in the same room, obviously, can do a lot more. So here's my question: are you guys doing team events in the Pipeline Council? Because I think you should.
Yeah, it's a super great idea. So for us, yes, we are. And part of the reason for that is that our CRO has both marketing and sales. And so they're already like one go-to-market unit, and they're already pretty aligned in that way. So, they have like go-to-market offsites where sales and marketing are there. My guys are there kind of like supporting, being embedded in the team. This past time, I couldn't make it because of just the timing, but normally I would go. And you're right, like you need to have drinks with those people and, stay out late with those people and just be friends with them and spend time together. So I do think that's important, and it starts at the top. So for us, it's very simple because there's one leader and it's his team. For other companies where you might have a CRO and a CMO, that alignment does have to start at the top, and you see those two individuals partnering very closely together. Reminds me that I never fully answered your question around like, what if you don't have executive support? And so what I would suggest for someone who wants to start a Pipeline Council, but they're not sure how, is to just go ahead and try it out. If you don't have this big executive sponsorship to make it, a big fancy event right away, then I would go a little bit more grassroots. I would just reach out to a sales director and say, hey, I'm a marketing director. You're a sales director. We should meet more often. Let's try out this pipeline thing together. And if we get traction, we'll take it to leadership and show them what we've done. And I think that's a great way to kind of prove it out if you need to from the bottom up. And just, there's not an exec in the world who's going to say, you shouldn't have gone and gotten that alignment with that team. It's
or just run.
It's always welcome.
No, I that was exactly what I was thinking about while you're talking. Like you have a CMO, you have a CSO, maybe a CCO or so. I think then a Pipeline Council, kind of in the middle management, VP layer, director layer, is maybe even more impactful because the teams are even less aligned, right? I think if you present that to executive leadership and they say, well, it's a bad idea, then you definitely know that they're definitely not up for the idea of a joint, aligned go-to-market motion, which tells you a lot, I guess, for your future career and what you should be doing. Okay. Just an open question, like anything else we forgot to talk about with regards to the pipeline council, anything else that comes to mind?
I guess I would say for the RevOps people listening, one thing that I learned the hard way over the course of, doing this a bunch is anytime that you show a chart and the question is, you'll show how things have moved and it's like, oh, you guys had 10 deals push at the end of the quarter. And they'll say, well, which deals? If you don't have that, you don't have a productive conversation. So it really does take a lot of preparation. And I am just so grateful to my team and the people who put in the time to get that data prepared. It takes dedicated effort to make sure you're ready. So you want to be able to answer questions live in the call. You want every slide to be as actionable as possible. And we strive for that. We don't always get it perfect, but the idea is that we want to bring enough to have some really detailed conversations. So I always suggest for people to literally block their calendar to have the time to prep, simply so that you can bring as many details as possible. If you happen to not use them, then at least you've learned a lot for yourself. So that's my sort of advice on just taking the time to make it really high value by putting those couple hours in before the call. And it's hard to do because all of us are so busy, and having that dedicated heads down time to look at things is a real luxury these days, but I find that it pays off.
Yeah, I'm super curious about one more question which just came to mind. I mean, you're sitting in these meetings, you had them in multiple companies. I'm sure there's specific patterns you're seeing with regards to gaps, right? Like, what would you say are those, top 3 gaps you're constantly, and it doesn't need to be 3, but what are the top gaps you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, I think one of the biggest hurdles to get over is this moment where you identify an issue and you say, well, what are we going to do about it? And your first instinct is to say oh, well, let us go back and talk about it and we'll let you know. We're going to get back to you. We're going to go back to our marketing cave and discuss it and come back and tell you later. And that is tough because then you stop the progress right there. And so as often as you can bust through that moment and collaborate together and share ideas together on the call, the better it is. And that is hard because you're just not used to necessarily doing that, right? So truly problem solving and truly sharing ideas and talking about how to fix something is one thing that is hard to really get in the habit of. And then I would say prioritization is typically always the root of any confusion. So, for Nylas, we've got a PLG motion. We have inbound leads that come and ask for a demo. We have an outbound BDR team creating meetings with prospects. We have a channel where partners are sending us opportunities. That's a lot. And so making sure everyone understands how to prioritize their work if they are inheriting opportunities from more than one channel, or if they're trying to qualify on a more than one channel, you really want to be on the same page with that. So there have been times where you don't realize that your priorities are slightly different than someone. And the best thing that can happen is for someone to raise their hand and say, well, my team doesn't get paid for that. We're not incentivized to do that with you. This is a conflict. This is a problem. And so those things get uncovered pretty quickly too. And if you identify something like that in the meeting, then that's just groundbreaking. You can change that. Every person in the room has the power to make the change to get people back aligned. And we have found that a couple times with our BDR team. They didn't have the right incentives. And so in order to achieve the priority, their incentives needed to change. And those are really cool moments where you start to see how you can make changes to align the business.
Yeah, you have ownership and accountability problem. It immediately becomes obvious, and you have all the people in the room to make the change, which is fantastic, right? And that's exactly what I think Philip was alluding to earlier, where the best teams are real teams. They work together. They solve these problems. They're almost like a working group. Maybe another question I just popped into my mind, because that's something I've observed, before becoming an entrepreneur. I was had a short stint at a consultancy, and I was sitting in big meetings from large corporates, executive level, and they were talking for 90 minutes to 180 minutes. And, then everybody left. Meeting probably costs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And there was no follow-up. There was no clear priority. There was essentially like nothing happening. How do you tackle that? Like, are you explicit like, hey, we don't even need to do something afterwards? Do you have like kind of an outcome and assigned task? Or super curious how you do that.
Yeah, that's a great follow-on. So I normally have a slide for next steps. And I don't know why I ended up in this pattern, but my favorite way to manage like weekly cadences like this is to use one deck and just keep adding slides to it so that the past weeks are still in there, And so every week there's a next steps slide or action items or whatever. And I write them down live during the meeting so that people can see what I'm writing and make sure everyone agrees with what it is. And those would be the action items after the call. And then the very first thing that you would want to do on the next call is review those and see if they're done. So that's a great way to create that accountability. We haven't had quite as many of those with the Nylas group. It was a big thing at Terminus. We had lots of that. I don't know why it's different, but we haven't had quite as many of those like action item reviews. But that's a great way to just keep track of things. And then you always have it in the deck. You always have the record of it. So if people do ask you, like, what is this pipeline council doing? You have all the data. You can show them everything that you guys have come up with from an action item perspective. And that's pretty cool too.
Sounds really good. Mallory, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. I think this is a super practical, podcast episode, like lots of learnings that people can just take and run with now. Thanks for sharing and very insightful. Yeah, we always ask, our guests one closing question. And that, you mentioned your introduction, right? Your original background, marketing, then moving into operations, lots of stops at different, very cool companies. And, looking back, what advice would you give your younger self or people just starting out in their career?
My advice is to get an early start to the day. Whether you're actually going into the office or you're remote, getting online before other people is just this like superpower. And I imagine that you guys feel that even a little bit more being like across the pond and having maybe a little bit of a time zone advantage on certain things. But when I was younger and I had no children, I wasn't married yet, I would get to the office at like 6 a.m. and I would go up to the roof and I would work out there and the sun would rise and it was so fun. And I just got so much done and I just felt very on top of it. I just felt like I had, 1.5 days when everybody else had 1 day. So it's not quite as feasible now because I have 3 children and, lots of obligations in the morning. But early on, that was like a real superpower, I think, for myself.
Yeah, having that slow time. Love it. Mallory, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the episode.
Yeah,
thank
thanks,
you so much
guys.
for joining.
Enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
We will talk soon. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the RevOps Lab podcast. Please consider to like and subscribe our show and give us a 5-star rating on wherever you're listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, let us know at podcast@getweflow.com. We read and reply to every email. Thank you.